Hello, Grand Rapids and all of YouTube. I'm Jeremiah Bannister of PaleoRadio, and today I'm accompanied by two super amazing cool dudes. You've got Joe Elder, and we ask that you forgive him in advance. He wasn't able to get the words at the bottom of the screen defining and letting everybody know who he is, and so you might be confused throughout the program as to who exactly Joe Elder is. He's the co-host of this program. How are you, Joe?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. We're also accompanied today by the PR director of Atheist Analysis, Christopher Tanner. How are you, my friend?
I'm all right. Bright
All right.
and early this morning I was up, so I am very readily awake.
Yeah, there you go. You know, I'm really glad that you're here again today, Chris. And today, you're welcome to chime in throughout the program. The last couple episodes that you've been on, this is now our fourth episode. The last ones that you've been on, you've been like the guy in the background, and every once in a while we'll drag you on in and have you say something. But today I'd like it if you just you can keep your mic on and whenever you'd like you can chime on in. All right?
Hey, it works for me.
Okay, sounds
No,
good.
I like to talk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of really, really cool stuff for you today. We've got a little bit of information we're going to talk about in a moment to do with the interfaith service that took place recently. My wife and I had the privilege to be in attendance. We're going to talk about civil rights. We're going to talk about LGBT issues, the NFL, KKK tabloids. This is a really big one. Rand Paul, and lastly, something that was sent to me on Facebook. It's a video sent to me by Autumn Smith, and it claims to be a video from kind of like Einstein's childhood when he was he was younger, and he takes on an atheist professor and everything. Really, really interesting video. But we're going to be talking about that. But before we do any of that, I wanted to take a moment and just say something about the year of interfaith service. I was really excited about this, Joe. It was, I forget where you were. You weren't able to be there. And I don't know if you were up north or what was going on, or if you had work. Or
I do believe I was up north for it. Or else
you were
I
up
would
north.
have been there, yeah.
Yeah, it was a bunch of fun. It was, there was, I guess, 60 people. Douglas Kinchy, he wrote about it in the Interfaith Insight section of the Grand Rapids Press. If people haven't read any of that, I strongly encourage them to do it. But he was writing and said there was about 60 people from representing Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Baha'i, and secular communities were there, and it was on the 13th anniversary of September 11th. We got together at the Catholic Information Center downtown, which is a great building. It was really interesting to be there, and got to meet a whole bunch of people. The mayor did a declaration, which was also very cool. I got to meet him. I got to meet Charlie Honey, Joe.
Yeah, I know it. That would have been impressive. That must have been fun.
Yeah, it was, dude. I approached him and I told him, I said, you know, I really appreciate what he does. I enjoy most everything, even the stuff that I disagree with. I generally enjoy reading. But I told him I thought he was wrong on miracles. I said, yeah. I walked over. I said, listen, I like your work, but man, you're wrong about miracles.
That plays into what you said last week with your short video on the difference between thin and thick dialogue.
Right. And as a reminder, thank you for saying that, Joe. For people who may not be aware, over the past couple weeks, I've made some videos. I have a video on top 10 books that changed my life, and I'm planning to do a lot more on those. Maybe we'll talk about those later. But I also did some videos on interfaith dialogue, and the most recent one I did this week had to do with the difference between thin and thick dialogue. And if you want to check that out, it's at the same YouTube channel that you're watching right now, youtube.com/paleocrat, PaleoCrat. But he goes through and he was talking. It was really cool, man, to be there. It was interesting to see so many different groups. There was a member from CFI who was present, Center for Inquiry. That was cool. I got to meet a whole bunch of people, and I got to meet local media personality Shelley Irwin for the second time. That was fun. It was just a great event, and I think of all the things that were said, and this is all I'll say about it. One of the things that was said that was really powerful, a real powerful moment, was a young guy, and his name is Mohib Azim. He's an engineering student at Grand Valley State University. He's from Pakistan, and he's the head of the Muslim Student Association at GVSU, and he was detailing how when he came from Pakistan, how he was filled with hatred for Jews specifically, and that in coming over here, he's built friendships with Jews since then, and they've become friends, and now they do outreach things, and in fact, some of his closest friends in school are Jewish people, and it was really moving story, and that was only rivaled by one other story that I happened to tickled my ears. It was Fred Stella. Fred Stella, as I was talking to Douglas Kinchy's the big boy over at Kaufman Interfaith at GVSU, and I was talking to him after the event, and this guy walks by, and he saw my name tag, and he turned around and he says, Jeremiah, he kind of interrupted kindly, but he interrupted, and he said, I just want to tell you I love your show and I miss it. You know, I miss your program. So I got to send this link then to Fred Stella and say, yes, you may have missed it, but we are back, my friend. And so, speaking of being back, moving on, there was as we were going through, Joe, and we were going through different topics to talk about, we both ran across this piece by Tim Stubik in the Grand Rapids Press. Citizens are way ahead of lawmakers on expanding Michigan's civil rights laws. And he talks about a poll, and I think most people at this point, because the numbers are so big, it's almost like, yeah, we can feel it, you can see it, you can sense it. But he said that, quote, if the polling data from the Detroit News is spot on, a whopping 73%, almost 3 out of every 4 citizens, is good with expanding the civil rights law to protect people from being discriminated against based on whether or not they're gay or lesbian. Okay. And that only 18% of Michiganders are against it.
Do you know if that law will also not just cover like a gender base, cover like the sexual base too? Because you know there's a difference between the sexual orientation and the gender orientation.
I don't know if that would be included in it. I'm not sure. I know that when it comes to issues of sexual orientation, you know, someone being attracted to someone of the opposite sex, I'm assuming that these numbers would have to do with that. I don't know, though. Okay, so I don't want to speak in a way that I out of my league here or out of my competency zone. But I think that the numbers, I would be surprised if the numbers were that big if it had to do so much with gender controversies and stuff like that. But I thought what was surprising is that only 18% of Michiganders were against it, right? And yet it seems like something that's really dragging here when we talk about legislation for it. You know, there was I'll go on. He talks about the data a little bit more, and he says this. He says it's the young kids who are at the head of the line. 81% wonder why there is such a big fuss over any of this. 14% of those between ages 18 to 29 disagree. So you're in that same, 14 to 18, less than 20% thing. And he goes through and says, if you look at the data, this has support across all age groups. 75% of those between 30 and 39, 72% of 40 to 49, 73 between the ages of 50 and 64, and the only drop-off is for people older than 65. 53% are on board, so you're still over half. 18% are somewhat supportive, so now you're a combined interest of about 71%. And the same thing's true of men and women. 81% of women supported, 67% of men.
Well, this is one of those cases, too, where I think it is the kids at the back of the line, but it also is its residual effect of having baby boomers. We still have baby boomers who are 50 to 60 years old, and over 70% of those agree with this and would be okay. And, I mean, that is a residual effect of the huge cultural changes that happened back in the 60s. And I think there is seriously a connection there. The only reason being that if we would have taken these same generations and moved them back one peg, there's no way 50 or 60-year-old people in the 70s would be considering this. No way.
Oh, yeah, no way. I mean, I think it's just remarkable to see the difference in that. What do you think are the reasons for this? I mean, people have gone over their ideas as to why. I'm interested in to know your ideas as to why it's becoming so common. I mean, I guess what's startling to me is the over 65 crowd. 53% are on board, 18% are somewhat supportive. If you go to 50 to 64, that's still I mean, you're still getting up there in generations, and 73% of these. I mean, what do you think caused? What do you think caused this shift in public opinion?
Yeah, I think family members having gay family members, knowing that they have out homosexual family members or friends, and actually changing the face of what they thought homosexuality was in the 70s. The connotations and the stigmas with it aren't connected anymore. Not nearly as such as they used to be. So when people started coming out of the closet, then I think that changed the way, at least when someone says something about people who were gay, there's someone who would say, well, I know someone who's gay and they don't act like that. It's a way of breaking down stereotypes, and we've been able to do that for about 10 or 15 years, solid. And I think we're moving into an era where it just becomes commonplace. It's a natural thing that people know people who are gay, people don't care. Kind of like interracial couples of the past, you know.
Or smoking weed.
Sure.
Yeah, smoking weed. A number of things, and I think that whatever issue we're talking about that at one time was taboo and later has kind of come into a realm of acceptance, it seems like all the time it's simple awareness that if people really can see someone who's gay or bisexual, a lesbian, that they can see that and say, you know what, this person's my friend. Like, I played sports with this girl, or I'm on a debate team with the guy, and whatever it may possibly be, that proximity and the awareness that proximity brings, or the proximity that awareness brings, right? That these things together, it seems to really be taking a toll here, right? On the discontents.
Yeah, and that's a social structure. That's a structure that people have used before. We do the same thing. I mean, we've seen this in different ways. That's why interfaith dialogue is so important. That's why getting there and changing the expectations of what an atheist is to people, and someone say, well, no, I have a friend who's atheist or agnostic or secular, and they don't act that way at all. They don't behave the way that you assume they do by not knowing the group. And so it's a human construct. It's part of groupishness and tribalism, but people want to other anyone who's outside of their immediate group. And so if you can get into those groups and present yourself in a different way, it changes expectations, and it changes the way people think about whether it's gay or whether it's people with racism or whether it's just secular thinking. It's really the same construct of tribalism that people use, and it's just understanding how to break those barriers down.
These numbers are big. 75% of 30 to 39, 72% of 40 to 49, 73% of 50 to 64, 71 combined for 65 and over. These are such big numbers. There's still discontents, though. I mean, that's still 1 out of every 4 people are people who are discontent. And I guess moving to the story that we have connected to this is the one Michigan Republicans may pair Gay Rights Amendment with Religious Freedom Act, and this is also something that I read on MLive. And do you think that's really what this is? I mean, do you think that in order to appeal to that 25% group, that's maybe the reason for the urgency for this scramble to religious liberty, and saying, well, we need to somehow protect this increasing minority of people. They're becoming increasingly so the minority of people. How do we stave off the anger that is bubbling up from the smaller and smaller numbers of people? I do think that's one of the reasons for the legislation.
I think the legislation is a backlash for it, sure. I think it's lashing out, and it's also, people are still, again, it is a bit of tribalism and groupishness. People are still in their groups discussing these ideas amongst people who have all the same ideas. So when you sit in a church room, if you're at a church and there's 100 people in the congregation, you're all talking about God, it's pretty much assumed you can think almost everyone in community thinks about this, because here's 100 people and we all agree. And so I think there's this idea of groupishness of ideas, really, where people are holding on to it. So I think people that are predominantly religious hang out with other people who are just predominantly religious, and that way their idea of the whole world of America is that we're way more religious than we are secular. And so this breeds a notion that you're trying to save what used to be America, or what used to be your homeland, or however you want to look at it. But really, it's the entire nation is changing. It's not, you're not just losing your group. The entire nation's ideas about these things are changing, and it's a struggle to try to maintain their ideas.
And if you look at it, you say if 70+% agrees with this, and let's say 70% also identifies with religion, right, or with Christianity in Michigan. I mean, I don't know what percentage that would be. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you have to presume, safely assume, that it's a pretty significant number. What that would show then is you would likely then, given that statistic, you would have more people professing religion who also believe in extending anti-discrimination to include that than religious people who don't, which seems to be has profound indications and implications for the nature of modern religion as we know it.
Yeah, it changes everything. It splices up religion in many different ways. It is going to cause different factions, which is okay. It's a breaking apart of it's another breakdown of fundamentalist religious beliefs, which I would say is a positive thing.
You know, House Speaker in Michigan here, Jace Bolger, in this article, he's talking about how businesses shouldn't be able to fire employees for being gay. I mean, that's good. But he's not supporting these anti-discrimination bills that were introduced last week by Democrats, and his answer for this was that he's trying to find what he calls, at least, a necessary balance between gay rights and religious liberty.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
There is no balance.
Oh, go ahead, Christopher. Sorry.
I was going to say, there is no balance. It's just an illusion. He's just trying to not lose the conservative vote. That's all he's trying to do.
And how funny is it that there must be a balance? There's no balance that's required for straight people, right? That balance is already struck. We get full rights. But for some reason we have to restrict gay people's rights by still having to find some sort of a balance, some rational balance here. Or it's even funnier that he thinks that he doesn't want people to get fired because they're gay, but he's not sure if businesses shouldn't have the right to fire you if you're gay.
Yeah, right. I mean, right, because of a religious belief. And I said something before the show, and I'll say it again. Like, it's so weird. Every time the religious liberty question comes up, it's always in contrast to something that large numbers of people believe religiously, right? Like religious liberty is something that's exclusively for people who are conservative religious people with bigoted views, almost. Like, it's just a safe place for them. And it doesn't include the religious liberty case that can be made from someone who's like, oh yeah, I totally believe that gay marriage is okay with Jesus. like, what about their religious liberty? It always seems like religious liberty is applied to like the Glenn Becks and Rick Santorums of the world. And that nobody else is religious. Those religions don't have any liberty either.
Sure. And we have a sensationalistic media. So people that are in the middle and moderate that want to get along with everybody, they just don't get much. There's not much pizzazz to them. You get headlines when you post things that Rick Santorum says, because he's insane. So you post those things up and you use those as your fodder, and it becomes. It does. I agree with you 100% that religious liberty is really it's a different word for bigotry, a la religion, in a way. I mean, right. It's defend bigoted beliefs. Almost in its entirety, that's what these laws are about.
And it's so funny that Bolger and them, they're talking about the RFRA, right? The Religious Freedom Restoration Act. They want this Michigan RFRA to allow business owners to assert a right to exercise their, quote, sincerely held religious beliefs.
And there it is.
I think it's just so interesting about sincerely held religious beliefs. What state entity is going to decide what is sincerely held and what's not?
Yeah, it implies that there's going to have to be a group of people who make these decisions. And how can you have a right, or how can you have the government respecting no establishment of religion if they are going to dictate which religions are acceptable? It just can't happen. It's a contradiction of the First Amendment.
You know, this isn't new to me. There was it had to be about a year ago, I think now, there was a bill, Kate Siegel here in Michigan, HB 4454. The whole idea was trying to address something that is a real problem, that the rules for education are set up in such a way that people who are religious, children in religious homes that observe holy days of obligation, that they can't take those holy days and be excused from absence. So they can't have perfect attendance. And Kate Siegel was trying to make it the case that if it's a holy day of obligation, you're not, you can have that and still have perfect attendance. Well, so far as I know, and I was told this repeatedly when I went up to Lansing to visit. I visited the Capitol, and I was talking to different state representatives and stuff about this, and none of them had really thought about how that would flesh itself out. Who's going to decide between what is a holy day of obligation and what's not, especially when the free exercise clause isn't just for groups but for individuals. And one person's obligation is another person's, well, that's heretical or blasphemous or demonic or not sincerely held. And I said, is it going to be a school board to decide case by case? Are they going to look at little Jimmy, little Sally and say, no, it isn't obligatory for you and your religion? I mean, like, what group? And I brought this up. I'll say this real quick, and I want to hear your thoughts.
Sure.
I brought this up when I went to Lansing. I brought this up with the people in State Representative Jeff Irwin. He's a Democrat from Ann Arbor. I brought it up to the people in his office, and I was just so happy to see that a quote from him, right, when talking about this specific thing with Bolger, that he pointed out, and I'll just quote from the article, that Jeff Irwin pointed out that free exercise of religion is protected in the First Amendment and suggested that a Michigan RFRA could have unintended consequences in court. And this is a quote, right? And this is interesting given that they didn't really think about this before PaleoRadio went to Lansing. And here's the quote, RFRA will only create conflicts between religious beliefs and put the state in a position of determining which religious beliefs are bona fide and which religious beliefs are not acceptable. We don't want to go down that path. That's the same argument that I presented that was like, we didn't think of this before in talking about HB 4454. And I don't want to say that Jeff Irwin got his wording from PaleoRadio, but I kind of do. I kind of do. I kind of want to say, all right, Representative Irwin, thank you. That's really cool. But anyway, so, but I think that's true. I think that it's something that the religious liberty crowd, they don't really. I haven't seen any article or paper that's advancing this idea, saying here's how we can have our cake without eating it too, right? That here's how we want to do this, but we're not going to set up state theology boards that decide between what is sincerely held or what is a valid religious belief and what's not, and whatnot. I'm not seeing it. It's like they're scrambling, it seems.
This is a little bit of a different question, but being that 75% of people would want these amendments to be changed for the benefit of people to not be fired if they are gay, wouldn't you think if it was a natural market and Michiganders knew somebody who fired someone just on the basis of being gay, that they probably could lose a lot of business because 75% of the people don't agree with that?
Right.
And could it die a natural death as a privately held business that way? Like,
right.
I don't know. It's just more of a question, but it seems as though maybe even not making legislation would allow these things to die out in the next 10 or 15 years because people don't support these things anymore.
See, where I would disagree somewhat with that. I mean, I do agree, yes. Will they die out naturally? Yes, I do agree that would happen. But, some of me says that we should create some sort of a legislation aspect to it. We should be able to have that because of the fact, if you look at it and you look at, we'll just take the interracial marriage thing. People still are going to want to discriminate. You're still going to have sections, especially in Michigan, that are going to want to discriminate against LGBT rights and equality, no matter what you do. I mean, look at Holland, for Christ's sake. They've tried to get it on their board, and they're just that city is very closely held board, and it doesn't matter what Until Love Equal is doing, they can't get them to change their anti-discrimination laws. And so I guess I had the same question, and it kind of came up on another show that I was working with years ago. But the biggest question is, why should we legislate? Why would we want to legislate? And the answer to that question is because of the fact that you're still going to have people that will discriminate no matter what we do, and their businesses may not suffer because of the aspect that they're in, because of the area that they're in. They may never suffer for it. And if we don't legislate and we don't help the disenfranchised people and the minorities, it's not going to do any good.
Sure. Yeah, and it was more of just a positive question. I wonder,
Right.
Sometimes I wonder about it because, like me, frankly, I haven't walked into a Walmart in 3 or 4 years. I haven't gone to Hobby Lobby in forever. Never. I'm not going to anymore. And I think more people are conscientious of people that screw others over than they've ever been, especially with media. I think in another 20 years, Yelp reviews will be more important than almost anybody's advertising. And people will be able to move and mobilize quickly against things. Or look how quickly people have already. And sadly, sometimes they do it in the negative light, like we see Chick-fil-A, and people go support Chick-fil-A in droves. So you're exactly right in that sense. People will always discriminate. It's a question, and it's a timeline. If you allow it to be that long, how many people are discriminated against, and the time it takes for people to stop, basically.
Yeah. And I think too, I think one of the other things that people don't recognize, or maybe they do recognize, but one of the other things that's a big one is because a lot of people will go, well, LGBT rights aren't the same thing as interracial marriage, because interracial marriage is something, you're born with your skin color, period. It doesn't matter what you do. Mm-hmm. And, on the other aspect of that is the research shows that being homosexual or being gender neutral or asexual or any of those different things, it doesn't matter what you do. Those are something that's natural too. You can make a choice, but the majority of it is something, I couldn't force you to go out and, be with somebody you don't want to be with unless I had a gun. And I think that's why we need to actually protect these things, is because it is not specifically a choice. It is something that you're biologically born with.
Sure. It's a predisposition.
Yes. And there you go. Well, long story short, that's where I wanted to go with that. That's where I would say why you would want legislation for that.
Mm-hmm. And I enjoy reading, people speculating as to whether or not, for example, whether or not slavery would have disappeared without the Civil War, for example. Did we need to actually engage in the Civil War in order for this to happen? Same thing with this, but the question is, we can theorize about that, speculate about it, in a place of relative comfort, knowing that because of a war, because of laws, that we are in a different place. And that meantime is what I think it's about. Like if a law is not passed, there's no real solid way to predict how long it would be before the market could possibly take care of it. And it's also that markets can swing. Look at how public opinion swings so rapidly. Take the ISIS situation, for example. That's like a massive swing. And I don't want to go down the ISIS lane here, but just simply to say that you have an issue that just a matter of a month ago, very, very few people believe we should be involved. We need to not intervene. And then a couple of videos later, in Kazam, we have a major swing in public opinion.
But wouldn't that be? It would be a major swing in public opinion. But if we're trying to adhere to the opinions of the majority, that would be what we'd be going with, whether it's against what the minority wants or not.
Right.
So I agree with that. I think if it changes or it may move in structure. They may be like the opinion with ISIS has shifted, but also the call to action has shifted, and now things have changed and transpired, and now it's justified, and things could change back the other way.
Right, they could. Speaking of things changing and changing the other way and changing again, the NFL.
Yeah.
Okay, what's up with this, man?
everything's up with the NFL. Hypocritical.
Hypocritical.
There's been a fallout here, and I don't really blame. I don't know if I want to blame NFL owners and executives like CEOs like Roger Goodell, right?
Right.
Or do we just blame the bad imagery of the NFL? But more specifically, what I want to talk about is focusing on Ray Rice and Adrian Peterson, the two main aspects of what's been going on lately. My only issues with Ray Rice would be simply that this was a man who was basically kicked out for 2 games, and he was suspended for 2 games in the NFL for striking his wife, or his then fiancée, in an elevator. But the elevator footage only showed her being drug out unconscious. They didn't actually see the event happen. That was previously. Now, much later on, after the sentence has been handed out and the decision has been made, the video of him actually striking his then fiancée comes out and is released by TMZ, and then the NFL is put into a predicament where now they actually have to give a different ruling based on the social pressures and the swing of how people's expectations have changed. My biggest problem was that I believe sincerely that if Ray Rice wasn't NFL's spokesperson for NFL Play 60 and their spokesperson for their charities, that he would have been given a sincere, maybe a 6-game suspension. But it shows how hypocritical the NFL is to give basically a namby-pamby sentence out to their boy, to their buddy, Ray Rice. And then when the media starts to pressure them with what really should have been done, then they come back and want to claim high horse and say, oh, we handled this incorrectly. But indeed, they handled it the exact way they wanted to. It was handled out exactly as they wanted it to.
Right.
But moving on from Ray Rice, more importantly, the thing that I like to focus on is Adrian Peterson and striking his boy.
Yeah.
And Clayton Hardiman had a great piece on this. It's NFL and society send mixed messages when it comes to violence. And this is out of Muskegon, Michigan, but Clayton Hardiman has a really unique story, Jeremiah, and I know you've read this article and you know a little bit about it too.
I loved it.
Yeah, and Hardiman has a background where he has been, he was violently abused by his father, and he basically, well, I can get some quotes here from it, but he brings up being a small child and starting a fire as a young boy, and knowing that because of how he had been punished for small things such as using friends' toys by his father, that the knowledge of that was going to be so great that he'd rather, if the police came to the door, grab onto the police and go to jail than to face his father's hand.
Right.
And he tells a story basically about how he grew up in a time where it was a sexist, racist era, and a time where people could beat their children. And he says, you know, I did indeed turn out okay. So is this something to hang our hat on and say someone who, it opens up a lot of questions about how children can be treated or how parents can discipline their children. And maybe you'd want to elaborate more on it too, Jeremiah. But
well, I want to quote Hardiman, dude. And if people haven't read it, let me encourage you to read it for yourself. Clayton Hardiman wrote a piece called "NFL and Society Send Mixed Messages When It Comes to Violence," and there was a couple takeaways from this that are just really, really excellent. He's a great writer. In fact, that was one of the first things maybe I've ever read from him, and it was just really. It was really thought-provoking, but he says this, quote, "The truth is we have a hate-love relationship with corporal punishment. Even those of us who endure it in our own childhoods aren't sure how to remember it. We store our memories in a neighborhood halfway between nightmare and comedy routine. What we remember with dread, we also elaborate as a badge of survival." And he says things like, "Look at me, you know, we'll tell each other. I was whipped and I turned out okay." And then he goes on and he says, why did this change? He said maybe it began with the difficulty in his own life, talking about his beliefs about spanking and things like this. And this is where I relate to him. My beliefs have been evolving over time on this. But he said, so why did that change, his beliefs? He said maybe it began with the difficulty of reconciling my hatred of violence with my willingness to use it as a loving tool. Then came a time when I resolved never to spank a child out of anger, which became a refusal to spank while I was angry. I found myself spanking less and less. And I went through that too. In fact, on PaleoRadio, when it was on AM/FM, I talked about spanking one time, and I was talking about how we had resolved to not spank when we're angry, or to spank out of anger. And I found myself spanking less and less and less and less, and feeling guilty when I did, because once I did, I would think about it and say, dude, I was mad. Mm-hmm. Like, there was hardly ever a case where I wasn't like angry and wanting to spank, and it's a tough situation. So Hardiman, he goes on, he says this. He said, what about Ray Rice? What do we do with him? How do we tell our sons that a real man doesn't hit the one he loves when their bottoms are still smarting from our loving discipline? He concludes by saying, it's a difficult challenge, working our way through all of this. What we can't afford are those facile badge of honor cliches that excuse what we survive. After all, look at me. I was raised in an era of sexism, war, and virulent racism, and I turned out okay.
That's right.
End quote. And I thought that was brilliant. I said, I mean, we don't use those. We shouldn't in any way use that same line of reasoning as an excuse for sexism, or as an excuse for war, or as an excuse for racism. But yet we use it for things that like corporal punishment. I think what I liked most about it was that he wasn't so much telling you this is the way you ought to believe, as he was challenging the rationale that so many people have when justifying their practice of corporal punishment, and just simply throwing some ideas out there and saying, how do you feel about that? Are you angry when you do this? Have you found that you're spanking less and less when you use this line of reasoning? And it was really insightful. It was really good too, because of his personal relationship with strife, right, and fear, and being abused as a child. To hear about that, it was just a great read. I encourage people to check it out. Speaking of great reads that people need to check out, dude, the KKK.
Yeah.
The KKK has been somebody in Zeeland, Michigan on Monday started throwing a whole bunch of these KKK newspapers on the lawns of people. It's like 5:30 in the morning.
Spreading the humble message of God.
Well, they wouldn't even.
Racism.
Yeah, they've got even farther than
dude, it was what's his name? Shiler Wilson. Shiler Wilson, he heard a loud pickup rumble by as someone in back tossed newspapers on the lawn. He didn't think much of it. I don't think I would either if I was just, if I saw a truck driving by and somebody's throwing newspapers out and stuff, I'd be like, oh, whatever it is. And then go out, and he said until he opened the paper that printed material about President Barack Obama, his skin color, and asked if he was Jewish.
Ooh.
Well, yeah. So
and that is the horn honk with the Dukes of Hazzard.
Dude, the newspaper is called The Crusader, the political voice of white Christian America. And Shiler Wilson said, this is a quote, it was kind of a shock, right? Like, to open it up and to find out this was the paper that was on the lawn. I had something similar to that, where we had a package that was left by our mailbox. It wasn't in it; it was by it. And I opened it up, and there was all this literature, this real old school traditionalist Catholic literature about outside the church there's no salvation, stuff talking about the Jews, stuff talking about interfaith issues and stuff like that. And it was but a lot of the stuff in there was unnerving, and it had a huge this printout. They were all printouts and stuff that they kind of just shoved into this envelope. And one of the printouts, of course, was talking about how very, 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 very few people will be in heaven. That most everybody that's ever lived is going to be burning forever in hell. And that was unsettling. Like to open it up, you're like, oh, what's this? I got a card. Maybe it's my freaking birthday. And open it up, oh, damn. Right? Like, what the heck is this?
The easiest way to send that message is to stuff random things into somebody's mailbox.
Yeah.
That's how you get eternal salvation. is by violating people's mail.
Well, and I like how eternal salvation has become something that only people with some kind of internet literacy are able to attain. Like, if you don't have access to a www dot that talks about conspiracy theories, well, you're just screwed.
You're screwed.
You know, like, wow, isn't that interesting? Like, you know, that message must be very important. Right? Like, it's not something that can just be relayed. You know, I mean, it's divine. God's like, well, I just can't bypass the www thing.
And Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it's www dot. Sometimes it's a guy in a pickup truck throwing his racist junk on your lawn. It could be anything.
Now, this is an interesting thing. What should be done about that? Should anything? Because the city there in Zeeland, Michigan, the city attorney is James Donkersloot. He wondered, quote, why were they dropped off? Where did they come from? What was the point? Right? He doubted that the city could stop distribution of the materials, as some people asked at Monday's meeting. Apparently people were like, hey, you need to stop the dissemination of this stuff. I don't think the city should get involved in that. I think if people don't want it and they find it on their property, chuck it. Just get rid of it. You know, take a picture burning it or something. Share it on Facebook. Your friends will like it.
Turn it on its head, and we can make a whole bunch of jokes about it, and get all your black friends to hang, we'll all laugh and light it on fire and post it on your Facebook. Just take what the idea is and flip it on its head. Use social media against it. That is the beauty about the www dot. Is you can make it like that.
Yeah, Christopher, I'm gonna drag you out here of silence. Like I said I wouldn't do, but I'm going to do it anyway because I've been seeing some. I've been so busy the past week or two that it's been really hard for me to keep up with all the stuff going on with Atheist Analysis. But Atheist Analysis has some really cool promotional stuff going on, and they've had stuff going on for the past couple weeks. There's new shirts and everything else. I think you took a picture on your Facebook with your new Atheist Analysis shirt. Take a minute and let our audience know a little bit more about what's going on with Atheist Analysis.
Well, actually, I would proudly announce that we have officially hit our fundraising goal with Grilling with Atheists. So Grilling with Atheists is kind of our first charity venture. What we did is set up a GoFundMe account. And we asked people to come donate. We got some donations from like Be Secular. We donated some shirts and some aprons. And we got Skeptics Annotated Bible to donate a few Bibles. And we also got... what was the name of the Bedtime Bible Stories to donate a few books. And so we just set a bunch of these packages up and allowed people to come donate, and it's 100% charity. None of it goes in our pocket. We're not using any of it to even buy new equipment. It's literally going to feed homeless people in Georgia. And we officially, as of about 25 minutes ago, hit our goal for $600 and something, so that we can now go, so that we can now go feed homeless people in Georgia. And since this event so far has been a success, what we want to do is set it up and get people to do it in cities around the world. So there will be one that's going to happen in Grand Rapids. It may not happen till next year just based on the fact that it's so cold up here. Who the hell wants to try and grill a hot dog in the cold? But, you know, we never know. We also have another sponsor, and I won't release his name yet, but we have another sponsor that's offered to sponsor the same event in his city. So that's kind of where Atheist Analysis is going. We want to do more charity stuff. That's our first charity venture. So far it's been pretty successful, and we're going to continue to do that. The other things that we have going on is, you know, we've had some very heavy topics on the show. Last night was not, but other topics we've dealt with women's rights and abortion for about a week. And we had 3 shows about women's rights and abortion. And I'm actually making smaller videos of some of those for people to kind of check out, like highlight reels. And that's kind of the direction we're going with Atheist Analysis. We have a show on Mormonism coming up where we're going to get into Mormonism, why it's a cult, and, you know, basically the abuse of it. This Wednesday we have a show about pastors leaving the churches. And we have a show on transhumanism, which, I'll be honest, I don't even know what transhumanism is at this current time.
Right.
But we are. So we're also working on getting our shop up. We have two types of T-shirts. We have a regular T-shirt. I don't have mine on right now. It's in the wash, but it's got our logo on it, and we also have a cutoff sleeveless T-shirt that we are going to have available. They're going to basically be $10 to $15, $10 for the shirt you see me wearing, and $15 for the sleeveless one. That I think John has that on his site. And we're going to take some of those proceeds and start putting them back into our charity side as well.
Yeah, and Jonathan's into those muscle shirts. He loves those muscle shirts. And he's always sporting a muscle shirt. Every time I see him, he's always got a muscle shirt.
Yeah, I don't understand why he does that. I think
we love Jonathan. We love Jonathan Brotherton. He's the big boy here with Atheist Analysis. And I want to say, for people who just heard what Chris was talking about the women's issues that have been talked about, that one of the groups that came on was a secular pro-life group, and I saw a debate between Dillahunty and the girl that was one of the girls involved in that on Atheist Analysis. But that's an exciting thing, so you can hear perspectives from all different angles on issues like women's rights and Mormonism and the like, and you can learn more at atheistanalysis.com. So, okay, Rand Paul, Joe.
Yes.
Rand Paul. He's both of us generally like Rand Paul, correct? Am I fair to say that?
True.
Right. Well, you don't like Rand Paul so much. So okay, so Joe and I are generally favorable to the likes of Rand Paul and even Justin Amash. Maybe even more, in my opinion, for Justin Amash than Rand Paul.
I'm way more for Justin Amash than Rand Paul.
Are you? Yeah. So anyway, but Rand Paul, he's been criticized recently. And I'm glad to see this. In fact, I'm glad to see all of it. I'm glad to see the prominence that he had when he first got in, when he was kind of this fire-burning guy, firebrand in the Senate. And then I've enjoyed actually watching him change his mind. Like, I really have. Like, I know that a lot of people get on his case about it because he has shifted his views. There's no doubt he's shifted his views. And I think on most of the issues that he shifted his views on, I don't see any problem with that. I don't look at it and think, oh, flip-flopper, he must just be a flip-flopper. I think that changing your mind on some issues is good. I like what Lawrence Krauss says. I was watching just recently, and I'll encourage other people to watch this too. There's a documentary called The Unbelievers. Really, really cool. I think it's on Netflix now. You can watch it. And Lawrence Krauss has this really powerful part of the video where he's saying that he hopes that everyone in their lifetime will believe something so strongly that it means everything to them, only to find out that they no longer believe it, that something changed their mind, and that they were able to think this thing through and to say, you know what, I was wrong about this, or at this time I don't know if that's really the way we should go. And so I've appreciated the mere fact that he's changing his mind. And so, but the Washington Post has been all over his heels on this. They talked about how he wanted to eliminate aid to Israel, and now he doesn't. He wanted to scrap the Medicare system. Now he's not sure. He didn't like the idea of a border fence. It was expensive, and it reminded him of the Berlin Wall. And now he wants two fences, one behind the other. Same-sex marriage, he's fallen back on the position, and I understand this too. I don't think this is much of a change, but to say, yes, I still believe morally that it's wrong, but Republicans should stop obsessing about them. Yeah. Right? I don't think that's really a flip-flop so much as
I don't either. I think it's more of him just wanting to change the dial of kind of change the compass of where they're directing their focus.
Chris is chuckling over there. I want to know why Chris is chuckling. What's going on with the chuckles there, buddy?
I guess I'll be honest. I don't understand how you guys like him. I guess I don't know enough about. I know more about his social politics than I know about his actual politics, I guess, or whatever you want to call him. I mean, he's not just he voted the Employment Discrimination Act down. He openly voted against it. And that was a year ago. Right. And he also stated that he believes marriage is between a man and a woman, basically. He didn't say those specific words, but
Sure.
and then he was also the one, if I remember right, he's the one that had he specifically had a rant, and this was when I think Romney no, was it Romney? It was, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years ago when Obama was running again, and he went on and basically said that the whole abortion thing, that women are just able to not be pregnant when they're raped, that they could just will it to not happen.
That wasn't him.
Todd Aiken.
That's Todd Aiken.
He said that the women's body has a way of shutting that whole thing down, was what Aiken had said. Yeah, a Republican out of, I think, Montana or Idaho or something like that. But the reason why I like Rand Paul is because of a 13-hour filibuster against drone striking. That was huge for me. That was very big in the way I felt about him. And he shifted his views on him shifting his views on Medicaid has changed a lot for me too.
Right.
But I think economically he doesn't know what he's talking about. I do agree with that. I think his idea of what the size of government and the scope of government should be is wrong. But I also think he brings up things that nobody else will, like the drone strikes, and he'll actually filibuster the Congress for it. And I mean that was a big deal to me that when he stood there with the numbers and saying, look, for every drone strike, it's roughly 18 civilians that are being killed. This isn't safer. This isn't good for U.S. foreign policy, and it's a bad way of saying it's an alternative way of fighting a war. And I really commend him for that. That's a big reason why I like Rand Paul. But I don't think he's right on everything.
Yeah, no. And, you know, I look at it and say, yes, with any politician, there's going to be big disagreements I have, you know. And, like, I'm one of those who's socially liberal, but I'm also economically, I wouldn't say I'm a conservative or even a libertarian, but I have no problem with I have very few problems with a smaller government than what we have. I've said before on AM/FM that I think we could go in, the most belligerent American could go in with his or her eyes blindfolded and a chainsaw and start going into the budget and wouldn't hit anything vital. You know, I think that there's so much that we do that's just radically unnecessary for us to do, and it makes where it's almost like medication sometimes, where if you get one medication, it might cause a problem with your cholesterol, so you need cholesterol medication, which might cause a problem with this, so you need that medication. And you just, eventually you're like the granny that has a purse just packed with her meds, and she needs all those because all those are built off of the other ones that are on there. And it's the same thing, I think, with the federal government. But you look at, or any government for that matter, but issues like foreign aid, you know, I agree with him generally that we need to be strict about foreign aid. I like his change of heart on the idea of not eliminating all foreign aid, but trying to be more selective about what kind of foreign aid we actually look at. Same thing with ISIS. I think that ISIS is a tough one. On the one hand, there's good arguments for why we shouldn't get involved at all. On the other hand, there's really good arguments for if we do get involved, the president needs to call Congress together to make a formal declaration of war if you're actually going to do that. And so I think that both of those things, and I liked what, I don't know if his campaign is chief staff or who it was, but said that he's been described as an isolationist, but he's a realist. And I think that that's the problem that people have with realism, is that realism is very pragmatic, and realism follows the facts on the ground. It says, I have my personal views of what utopia may be, and they allude to that in the piece about Rand Paul too, is that people have an idea as to what is utopia or ideal, but on a very pragmatic level when it comes to politics and having to represent large swaths of population, that you have to be more pragmatic, and sometimes that results in changing your mind or pushing something in a way that you may not have pushed it before. And I think I don't see too many problems with that personally.
Well, and I think one of the biggest problems, and this isn't by no way me defending Mitt Romney, but one of the biggest problems with our political system is that being viewed as someone who changes their opinion is a bad thing, and I don't know why. I don't want an idealistic person in there. I want someone whose views will indeed change with new evidence. I mean, that's the epitome of having a logical, sensible person, and we run into problems with that if people will keep their same ideology the entire time and not deviate from it, whether it be a liberal one or a conservative one, that's more detrimental to finding middle ground than anything else in our political system. It's someone who's just rigidly rhetorical and idealistic.
Well, I think that's one thing that a lot of people praised and criticized Ron Paul for, was that Ron Paul seemed to have the kind of position that just, it literally never changed, and it wasn't very realistic. It was, stick to your guns, don't ever change, this is what it is. And a lot of people thought that was a positive trait about him. Some people said it was a wonky type thing about him,
And I'm oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, say what you were going to say.
I am a very big Ron Paul fan, but that's the same thing as, the problem with that was he was right about a lot of things for a long, long time. And he's been wrong about a lot of things for a long, long time.
Right.
And he never, it is great when people say, well, he's been here since the 80s and he's never changed his mind. That kind of is scary. I mean, I'm under the impression that if you think the same way at 20 that you do at 50, you've wasted 30 years of your life.
Right.
And so...
He sounds like a conservative Christian.
What's that?
Right.
I said he sounds kind of like a conservative Christian in that.
Well, he is a conservative Christian. Yeah. Right.
Okay, there we go.
And that's why there's a push for homeschool, and that's why, he wants to cut public education, and there's a lot of things to that don't make sense. And that's why I say there's been things where, auditing the Federal Reserve, that's a great idea, and that's something that Ron Paul fasted, and that's fantastic, because the Federal Reserve is very much, in many ways, way too powerful. It makes sense. But then also saying we need to cut our education by 80% is ridiculous and insane for a country of 315 million people. It's insane.
Yeah. This there was a part at the end of the piece in the Washington Post, and I'll quote it. While Rand Paul has said he opposes same-sex marriage, he has also said the issue should be settled in the states, not in Washington. And he told the New York Times the GOP ought to, quote, agree to disagree on such issues in order to welcome a broader coalition into the party. That's a visionary within the Republican Party. I mean, it's a visionary position to maintain, and saying, listen, this is this is the way things are going. You can't fetishize this issue anymore. And that may be at the heart of the problem of the GOP, which I think is one reason why I like what Rand Paul is doing, is because he's taken on sacred cows. I mean, sure, he's got sacred cows of his own, but even just his presence, right, and what he's doing and what he's at least aimed to do ambitiously is to challenge these golden calves and to say, listen, you fetishize issues like pro-life, you fetishize issues like taxes, you fetishize issues like gay marriage or different programs, you fetishize these things. And if you want to be relevant as a political vehicle, both now and in the future, you need to realize that the times are a-changing and that it's a real thing. And maybe even just to be open to hear the perspective of people who would be willing otherwise to be involved in a coalition for political change in something he would be favorable to. And saying, I don't want to just cast that person out right away just because we disagree. Let's have this disagreement. Let's figure out how to do coalition building. And I think that's a good thing. For the GOP, I think it's a good thing.
I do too. And I think that I think the Republican Party would have something. They would really have something if they wouldn't try to legislate morality the way they do and then preach on the auspices of freedom. If they kept the rhetoric and they stuck with seriously letting people have freedom of choice, but that also meant moral freedom of choice, then the Republican Party would have a lot more weight, I think, in their argument. But the problem is they're so hypocritical to preach about freedoms and to say that we have a right to live the way we want to live, and then say, yes, but see, in the moral square we have a serious problem with you living with another person that's the same sex.
Right.
It's just such a contradiction of banging the drum of freedom and saying we want people to be able to live the way they want to live, and then also say, yeah, but not the way you want to live.
Right. It goes back to what we were saying about religious liberty and how conservatives, when they talk about religious liberty, they identify religion with conservative GOP right-wing Christianity. They don't realize that if you really mean religious liberty, and then you have to accept that there are a lot of people who identify with religion and who are religious people who disagree with you over these same issues, and they would have the same religious liberty as you, right? And that you don't define religious liberty in terms of your minority position, but instead you have to accept that religion is a broad term, and it's as much about groups as it is about individuals. And the moment that and that's where it's hard for them, because on the one hand they want to maintain their individualism, this kind of American individualism that they believe in or claim to believe in, and yet on the other hand they're pressured by these groups, these minority groups, who want them to define religion in a way that's unrealistic to the whole.
And religion is not a head count. And when they want religious freedom, they're not thinking of Krishna.
Right.
They're not thinking of Jainism. They're thinking they want a head count religious freedom. We want to raise our hand. How many people here are Christian? How many people here want us to have a benefited advantage over other religions because we're Christian? Same thing. That's exactly what the angle is. And so they're not talking about the minority. When they speak for religious freedom, they are not talking about Muslims, obviously. They're talking about specifically Christianity and the forms of Christianity that are acceptable in America.
You know, there are a number of vocal people on the right now, especially in radio and at pulpits, who are making the case that religious liberty really only applies to Christian people, and that the First Amendment only applies to Christian people. And you're seeing this. And I mean, like I said, this is the minority position, even if at one time, and they can quote Justice Joseph Story. They can cite him and his commentary on the Constitution, which is very old but quite brilliant, and gives some idea maybe as to the original understanding of how it was. But in modern America, to say this applies only to Christians, the First Amendment, you're just not going to get away with that. It's a dead argument. It's gone. That might have worked when we had 30 million people, right? When we had 30 million, sure. But 300 million, no, I don't think so. Not going to happen.
No way.
No. Speaking of religion, this will be the last topic, and I want to say something about the thin and thick video that I made about interfaith. But before that, Autumn Smith, she posted on my wall on Facebook, she posted a video and just put thoughts, ? That was it. What are my thoughts on it? And it's a video claiming to be a real-life event in the life of Einstein. And that when Einstein was a young kid, that he was in a classroom and he had a professor or a teacher who was an atheist and was talking about good and evil, and little young Einstein gets up and puts the old smack down on the atheist guy, and he invokes an argument defending God from the accusation that he's the cause of evil, and he relies on this argument that says it's analogous to blaming cold on the sun. And that if the sun is present, you have light and warmth. If the sun is gone, you've got cold. But you can't blame light beams for the darkness and the cold. You're muted, I think.
I was going to say we can screen share this here. I have it. Yeah. I have it up right now. If you guys can see it.
Here, let me go ahead. I'm going to click on you here. There you go.
Ready?
Yeah.
Nun werde ich euch beweisen, dass Gott, wenn es ihn gibt, böse ist. Hat Gott alles, was existiert, erschaffen? Wenn Gott alles erschaffen hat, dann hat er auch das Böse geschaffen. Das bedeutet, Gott ist böse.
Herr Professor, existiert Kälte?
Was für eine Frage soll das sein? Natürlich existiert die Kälte. War euch noch nie kalt?
Nein, in der Tat, Herr Professor, die Kälte existiert nicht. Nach den Gesetzen der Physik ist das, was wir als kalt empfinden, nur das Fehlen von Wärme. Und existiert Dunkelheit, Herr Professor?
Selbstverständlich existiert sie.
Nein, sie ist nur das Fehlen von Licht. Wir können das Licht messen, aber die Dunkelheit nicht. Das Böse existiert nicht, genau wie die Kälte und die Dunkelheit. Gott hat das Böse nicht machen. Es ist das Ergebnis dessen, was Gottes Hand noch nicht berührt hat.
Yeah, that kind of thing really upsets me, right? Because it's one of these lying for Jesus things. It's like, well, I mean, just so people know, that story is complete BS. Like, that never happened.
Well, who said Einstein's a young genius? I'm going to go sit in his classrooms and write everything he says from third grade on.
Right. He never wrote of such a tale. In fact, and this is what gets me, religious people, conservative religious people, for the most part, have tried really hard to co-opt Einstein, right? Like, after his death, almost like, oh, we can get away with this. It reminds me a lot of how Mormons will baptize people after they're dead, and it seems like this is a baptism of Einstein in a way. And this isn't the first time. I'll just say this, and I want to hear what you got to say. This isn't the first kind of story like this about Einstein. There's the same story, but basically he's in college doing it. I mean, the story changes. Was he a kid in grade school? Was he a college student? Did he write about this? It never happened. It's a completely made-up story. And someone went to great lengths to make a video to portray Einstein in a way that is completely bogus in order to advance a theological position.
Absolutely. Well, and that's all it is about, is advancing the theological position. Plus, what they're saying in that does not make sense. Cold is the absence of heat, and heat is the absence of cold.
Right.
I mean, darkness is the absence. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. But if we were to take that and logically accept it, we can play around with it. For instance, saying things like, God can't resist evil. Yeah. Evil is an equal part of the creation of the universe, be it that God didn't create it, it still exists inherently. He didn't make it, and if he turns his back, it pushes and gains ground on him. So evil is an actual opposite entity that God can't even control. So is that a safer thing to assume about Jesus and the Lord, or is that a more dangerous thing to assume about the Lord if you're religious?
Well, in this argument, the first time because I used to use this argument, the first time I heard about it, I read it in the book Freedom of the Will by Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards, for people who don't know, I'm not talking the psychic guy. I'm talking about the guy who preached the sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a deranged, morbid screed. But he wrote this book called Freedom of the Will, and he relied on this argument in defending God from accusations that he's the creator of evil, saying that if God, analogous to the sun, if God's present, the more he's present, the more goodness is going to come out of people. If he removes himself and leaves nature to itself, it's going to just simply become more and more evil to the degree that he's removed himself. And I said, this is what I wrote to Autumn. I said simply, God doesn't need hands to cause the violent husband to beat the crap out of his wife and children every night. God just had to turn his back. And the rest, well, that would be inevitable history, right? Because it's like saying, well, no, God doesn't put his hands inside the husband's fists and punch the kids, but instead God just does, he turns around, turns his back, and to the degree by which God turns away, it inevitably results in a man beating the daylights out of his wife and children, and God saying, I didn't do it, I just turned my back on it. Voila, hands clean, no evil here. What's that?
These crazy kids, look at what happens when I leave them to their own devices. Mm-hmm. But I think it does. It presents a problem. Well, and we were speaking before the show about inevitability. If it's inevitable, then God may as well have done it. Is it part of his divine plan?
Yeah, right.
Bring into this.
Right. And if I knew that removing myself from a situation would cause a problem that would inevitably happen if I remove myself, then I can't simply act like I'm not in any way connected, especially if there's a causal relation to the good or bad that somebody does, insofar as I'm connected to it.
And even more powerful, if you are a deity, if you're a god, why not eliminate evil altogether? If you didn't create it, then why can't you destroy it?
Right.
And if you are, then are you really omnipresent, and are you really all-powerful, or are you half-powerful, because evil is the other half?
Right. The argument being presented in this video is only encouraging to people that are overwhelmed by confirmation bias toward their own religious convictions. But there's a quote taken from Albert Einstein, The Human Side, edited by Helen Dukas and Banesh Hoffman. And here's a quote. This ought to settle the score. We can just allow Einstein to speak for himself. Quote, "I cannot conceive of a personal God who would directly influence the actions of individuals, or would directly sit in judgment on creatures of his own creation. I cannot do this in spite of the fact that mechanistic causality has, to a certain extent, been placed in doubt by modern science. My religiosity consists in a humble admiration of the infinitely superior spirit that reveals itself in the little that we, with our weak and transitory understanding, can comprehend of reality. Morality is of the highest importance, but for us, not for God." There you go, Einstein in his own words. Like, you can't have a video promoting that without recognizing that in his own words, I cannot conceive of a personal God who would directly influence the action of individuals.
Exactly.
Right.
So if anything, when we think of, we can chalk up most of what Albert Einstein says in terms of religion as at maximum deistic.
Right.
And absolutely, a God that doesn't do fascinating intervention. It's just more like a candle, someone who lit the match rather than be someone who holds the fire. You know,
Yeah.
A deistic God. And so that is something completely, even if that God were to exist, that is something completely contrary to what people who think there's an independent God who looks over you and does favors for you. It's a completely different logical understanding of what a God is.
Well, and I'll finish with this. This will be the last quote I mined from him. He says, quote, "It was, of course, a lie what you read about my religious convictions, a lie which is being systematically repeated. I do not believe in a personal God, and I have never denied this, but have expressed it clearly. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world so far as our science can reveal it." Those are statements made by Einstein speaking on his own behalf against people who, according to him, had been systematically repeating lies about his religiosity. And I hope that religious people watching this, that they'll really think about that they'll really think about putting words or ideas into a dead man's mouth and mind who spoke openly and honestly about his opinions, right? About what he believed and why he believed those things, and what he didn't believe and why he didn't believe those things. And then to ask for the religious people to ask themselves why the need or why that compulsion to really smear the mind and legacy and words of a person for their own religious gain, whatever they could possibly gain from that. I mean,
Sure.
I hope that they ask themselves these questions and that they reflect deeply on that and how they would feel if someone from another religion or an atheist took them and created a fake story about them that promoted it, and how exactly they would feel.
Exactly.
I think some of it doesn't even matter to a point. I mean, no offense to the person who posted it on your wall, but all they're doing is saying, hey, believe what Einstein said because what Einstein said is true. And that, to me, just kind of seems illogical. Like, it would be like if I took Christopher Hitchens and said, Christopher Hitchens says this, and we should all believe what Christopher Hitchens believes.
Yeah. It's a logical trail, I think, of just saying, well, Einstein's a smart guy. He said stuff about religion, therefore religion is smart. And that's pretty much, that's the simple logical. And Isaac Newton was religious. Yes, he was, and so was everyone else in the 16th century. You know.
I mean, and I guess to go back and touch just briefly on the whole problem of evil aspect. For me, one of the biggest quotes I have, honestly, is Christopher Hitchens when he was talking about, and I can't remember the poor lady's name, when she was imprisoned in her basement by her father. And Christopher Hitchens puts it so elegantly, and I know William Lane Craig kind of deconstructs him a little bit after it, but as an emotional argument, this lady was imprisoned in her basement and repeatedly raped, had children with her father for 20 years, and how can any God sit back and watch that and not intervene? What kind of a God or a loving God would ever do something so in my opinion, so atrocious that anybody would ever want to worship him. And for me, that I know it's an emotional argument and it doesn't examine the logic of whether a God exists or not. But to me, that is one of the biggest things. How can God sit there and let these things happen? What is really the greater good?
That's right. I agree.
You know, there was when I was going through my deconversion, one of the things that really stuck with me was that very issue, and talking about, you know, I've got children, and I looked at them and I thought, what kind of a man or father would I be if I was watching and I was in a proximity where I could make a difference and I could stop what was going on, and my daughter was being violently molested, and she was crying out my name and looking to me to be a savior in that situation, and that I said, there's a bigger plan. Right. It's really uber mysterious. You just don't know what it is, and you'll never know it, but it's really, really big. Right. You know, and there's always kind of in the back of the believer's mind, there's always this redemptive quality to it, but to the kind of suffering and pain that people have. But it doesn't always work that way. Some people who were violently molested end up becoming drug addicts and killing themselves. Bad ending to the story. And given their religious convictions, that person, in all likelihood, having committed suicide and been a drug abuser or whatever, ends up burning forever in hell. That's not much of a redemptive story for the young girl getting violently molested. And so they can't really get away with that, and they can't be allowed to get away with that. But I think, following up on something you said earlier about, you know, this drive to say, well, Einstein said it, therefore it must be true. Religious people, especially conservative religious people, who would find anything in this valuable whatsoever, this video, without looking it up. The appeal to authority is part and parcel of what they believe already. So it's an easy thing to say, well, you know, God said it, or the Bible said it, or the founding fathers said it, or Albert Einstein said it, whatever it was, and that's sufficient. There's no need to put your fingers to the God known as Google to try to find out, is it true or false? I mean, is it pants on fire, right? Or is it a gold mine of truth? What is it exactly? And it seems it seems intellectually and morally lazy and disingenuous, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a consequence or whether it's part of the whole thing, but it seems intellectually lazy, morally lazy, and disingenuous.
And like you said, it's an appeal to authority. An absolute appeal to authority. People in science respect Einstein because he had theories that worked and were predictable. They didn't respect him because he was just a smart guy who said smart things. He was accredited because he had a repeatable, predictable theory that gave him credit in science, and that's why we look to what he says as giving it a bit of, you know, a renowned power. But that doesn't mean that everything he says is right. Science is not an argument from authority. So it's not that Isaac Newton said that gravity's real, why we believe it. It's because gravity's real is why we believe it. And it just happens to be Newton who discovered it. And so it's a backwards way of looking at how we've made discoveries and who has ownership over them. In science, this is a discovery that was made. In our history books, it seems like Isaac Newton found this. This is Isaac Newton's. And it's more of an appeal to authority. So when they say, well, Einstein said it, so that means, you know, really contradict everything you've ever thought in your life, because Albert Einstein said this religious quote that he never really did say. But if that's what if the case is, it still is at best an argument from authority with no repeatable or predictable evidence.
Give a shout out to Southpaws real quick as we're wrapping up here, bud.
That's right, Southpaws. I'm going to be on there tomorrow. It's every Tuesday and Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and if you're in Grand Rapids, it's on 95.3 FM. Or 1680 AM. And also, please come follow me on Twitter, JAYELLS, JAYELLS22. And yeah, lots of tweets, lots of comedy, good stuff.
Yeah, very good. And remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/paleocrat. Make sure to subscribe. That's always a whole bunch of fun. And check out the videos that we've been posting. I just in the last week and a half, I think I've posted 3 videos, 2 dealing with interfaith. The last one had to do with the difference between thin and Thick, Interfaith Dialogue. It's a good video. I hope you check it out. The other one of note was the 10 videos, or the 10 books that changed my life. And I go through, it wasn't my favorite 10 books of all time. Some of those wouldn't have made the list. But books that had a profound impact on the way I lived and moved and had my being. And so I encourage you to check that out. That's at youtube.com/paleocrat. And make sure to like us on Facebook. You can find out tons of information about Paleo Radio, about how to find us online. You can do that by going to facebook.com/PaleoRadio. And as always, Paleo Radio is one word. We'll let Chris Tanner say something real quick about atheist analysis, and then we're going to close up shop.
Yep, if you guys want to check out an awesome show, Atheist Analysis is on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. We actually, starting in October, will be moving to 10 p.m. Eastern Time to help accommodate some of our longer shows that seem to be coming about more lately. And we also are going to start a new segmented shows. We're going to start having more science. We're going to have more atheism stuff, and so if you like what we do and you want to help out, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can just go youtube.com/atheistanalysis.
All right, my friends, I want to thank you for listening. I want to remind you that we'll be back next Monday. Hopefully we get closer to that 10 o'clock time. It's mysterious, but and share the videos. And share news about Paleo Radio with all your friends. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to wish you the best week you could possibly have, and invite you to join us again next Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Have a good day, boys. See ya.